Hello, everyone, and I can't tell you how excited I am to be back with the Santa Rosa Junior College family. I want to first thank all the members of the college, the staff, and the faculty that helped make this happen so quickly, and a couple of our other sponsors, Clover Stornetta, who it wouldn't have happened without them, and the Biaggi brothers, Fred Biaggi, and thank you so much for a quick, expedited journey here in making this happen, so thanks again. I got to peek out and see some old faces and new faces, and I see athletes in the crowd. I see coaches and parents. I see teachers, business leaders, people from the spiritual community, and I think, how am I going to pull this all together with so many different interests? But I think you're in for a treat tonight. I was just listening to Phil and Chris talking back there, and I'm like a little kid in the candy shop. I could just listen to those guys all day. I imagine the athletes, you might be here for the reason of seeing if you can learn something about peak performance. These guys may know something about that, huh? And if you're a coach, you might look for ways to have more unselfishness and team play with your team, because we both know that they exemplified unselfish play. And if you're from one of the spiritual communities, you might be interested in visualization or meditation and how to integrate those spiritual practices into everyday life. Whatever it is that the reason you came here, I'm really confident that when you walk out, there'll be something you take away that gives you a tool or a new perspective to just find a little bit more of that greatness that lives within all of us. We have a guest who will introduce about halfway through our program, Kwang Roshi from the Sonoma Mountain Zen Center, and really without him and the Zen Center, this wouldn't be happening, because Phil came here today for a groundbreaking ceremony up on the mountain that my daughter and I were able to attend. It was just spectacular, and I'm sure they'll talk a little bit about that. So let me introduce our two guests. Many of you probably know more about them and just reading online and following their careers. So try to capture something about them that applies for this evening. Phil Jackson grew up in Montana. I understand he played all sports, baseball, basketball, and football. Chris didn't even know that both of his parents were ministers, so he had a real strong spiritual training and upbringing. He went on to North Dakota and then to the New York Knicks, where he won 2 championships as an NBA player. Doesn't happen too often. Other players have won more than that, but he won 2. And he ended his career as a player, and he went on, earned the head coaching position for the Chicago Bulls, and as you know, or many of you do, the rest is history. And when I say history, I mean history. I thought, well, let me just tell them, he has 13 championships as a player and a coach, and no one else even comes close to that, dead or alive, nor will ever come close to that. It's a record that only he holds. When he walks up here, there's no one else on this planet that has done what he's done. And that's amazing. That's enough to draw all of us here just to listen to him and be in his presence. But there's something else. He's a maverick. He does it his own way, and he does it uniquely. He does it by encouraging his players to read and to reflect, and gives them tools and inspires them to think about Eastern philosophies and Native American practices. He's also a member of the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame. Our other guest, Chris Mullin, is a man that is known for working harder and longer than anybody, focused and dedicated. As I've met his friends over the years, they all say no one outworked Chris. Grew up in New York. By the time he was in college, in his 4 years, he had won 3 Big East Player of the Year awards. It means 3 times in his 4 years, he was voted as the best player in his league. And then his senior year, he won the prestigious John Wooden Award, which is the highest honor any college basketball player can earn. He went on in the NBA and made the All-Star team 5 times. He has 2 Olympic gold medals, one as a college player and one as a pro. And oh yeah, he was on that dream team with Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, and Larry Bird. He, like Phil, is a member of the Hall of Fame, and it's great honor to be his friend. So, with no further ado, Chris Mullin and Phil Jackson. You're all right there, Chris. Thank you. They like you here, guys. Phil, I thought we'd start off the afternoon. I had an internet website where people got to ask questions, and a lot of folks wanted to know what you were doing these days since retirement, and are you happy with being a retired coach?
Yes. As I said today when someone asked me the question, the days come and go. They still are filled with a lot of things, but there's not that intensity that you have when you have players and a coaching staff and a life that's monitored by this 82-game schedule of an NBA season. So those things are missing in my life, but I'm very happy that I had a year to take off to get healthy and try to do some things physically to kind of improve my health. I felt I was going to get run down by coaching, and I'd spent a year or two longer than I wanted to coaching this game.
Do you think you might ever come back again, Phil?
Yeah, I'm going to come back, but it's going to be in a different way. I think it probably will be at a level where hopefully I can set up the culture of the team. Not perhaps hands-on with the coaching, but setting up who's going to be the coaches and who's going to be the scouts and how we're going to run the game and what kind of team we're going to have.
Great. Chris, we were talking, it's a little over 10 years. You've had 3 careers as a pro, and then as a general manager, and now on television with ESPN. A lot of transitions. How have you handled that, and what are the highs and lows of that transition?
Yeah, anytime you make that transition, there's some level of stress, sometimes the fear of the unknown. But I found over time, having an open mind, the way I look at it, you always get a chance to learn something new, deal with new people, learn a new industry. The GM position, which is basically Phil was talking about, maybe putting together a team, a lot more work than one would expect.
Oh, yeah.
And that itself could be the most important job. Phil could do both, obviously. I think he'd be great at both. But anytime you get into a new field, you have to keep an open mind. I think it's really important to understand, when I went from a player to a GM, some of those skills were transferable, but there was a lot that I had to learn. And learning is what it's all about. Keep an open mind and keep learning a new industry. When I went to TV, same thing. It looks pretty easy, but there's a gift and a process that you have to go through to get good at that job as well.
Mm-hmm. Over the years, Chris, I know you haven't spent a lot of time talking with Phil, but we've talked a lot about Phil. And as a player and as a general manager, when you think about preparing against Phil Jackson's teams, what made it different or unique than maybe other coaches?
Well, first of all, Phil Jackson, I've watched, and you mentioned as a player, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, so the teams that Phil played on, that was the teams I watched. really, as a kid, there were three teams. There were the Knicks, the Celtics, and the Lakers. And the New York Knicks team that Phil played on, that was my team. Danny Whalen, who was your trainer, I went to school with his nephew. So we felt a connection there with that New York Knicks team, and Bill Bradley and Dave DeBusschere. And their mantra was hit the open man. Yep. Pass the ball, be unselfish. And I think Red Holtzman, the way he coached, had a huge influence, especially in New York, on how the game was taught to us. The fundamentals of the game, it was about playing the total game, not dribbling and getting points. And I think your teams had a huge influence on the way the game was taught in New York City when I was growing up. Phil Jackson, the coach, I think a lot of people don't understand, he paid his dues. And you mentioned his college, and he went right to the Bulls, but he was in Albany in the CBA. He worked his way up. He was an assistant coach on his way to 11 championships as a coach. But I always admired, and like you're right, son, we talked a lot about Phil and some of his players that I'm friendly with. I was always quizzing them. How does he balance the teamwork when you have stars? How do you balance the competitive edge? I know one thing for sure, which I would like to ask, I know a lot of people always bring it up publicly, but being in a visiting locker room, how when your teams, maybe the opposing team is on a 12-0 run, and 99 out of 100 coaches would be, timeout, timeout, and you're sitting just like this. Is that, I'm sure some influenced by your coaches, but also by a Zen lifestyle?
Good question. Chris was a freshman at St. John's when I was attempting a television analyst work. I come out of player coach at the end of my career with the New Jersey Nets and was moving into do I want to be a television analyst or what? And my nickname before Mark Jackson went to the Knicks was Action Jackson. I was hyperkinetic as a kid. My mother always told her sisters, my aunts, that this boy wears out my skirts when he sits on my lap. A lot of nervous energy. And one of the things I had to do was curtail my energy and learn how to do that. So yes, there was sitting and being quiet. I'll tell you the genesis of that. When we were playing Detroit, the Bad Boys in 89, 88, one of those situations got out of hand where Chuck Daly got very incensed, got up off the bench, was moving a lot, and Dennis Rodman started moving a lot and ended up creating a situation that turned into a brawl. That's the one you might have seen Doug Collins being thrown over the scorer's desk. I found out when I started coaching Dennis Rodman that he fed off my energy. So the calmer I was and the more I sat down and watched the game, the more likely Dennis was going to stay in the game. Otherwise, he may be ejected. So it was a combination of monitoring a player, but also the situation. When it comes to this 12-0 run, yeah, there's been a couple of those that have happened in critical situations. And my belief, like my coach, Red Holtzman, that the team had to be able to monitor itself. Red was a guy who, unbelievable for coaches that are here, never diagrammed a play. If he sat down with you in a restaurant or a diner or something, he might move some salt and pepper shakers around, but he never diagrammed a play. So when he wanted the play diagrammed, he would say, Phil, will you go up on the board and diagram what you're talking about or what this team does? And that was kind of my specialty with this team that was very creative, this New York Knicks team that was, I think we had 4 college players of the year on that team at one time. So I learned from Red some things, and one of the things he used to say was, when we came in the huddle, what do you guys want to run? He left it in our lap, and DeBusschere had been an NBA coach and a player coach at the time when he was 25, 26 years of age, and he might say, you know, Clyde's got a real good, Walt Frazier, excuse me for using a nickname. Walt Frazier's got a real good guy that he can take. You know, let's get the ball to Walt on the left wing and we'll set a screen roll for him or something like this. So he left it in our hands. And his idea was the team has to understand who they are. And that was a really good philosophy. I believed in it and I still use it.
Worked pretty good.
Give the ball in Michael Jordan's hands, it might work.
Phil, when you were coaching against Chris, all the years, but particularly when he went to Indiana and he was with that really good team, and I think you guys were in the playoffs together and went to Game 7. How'd you prepare? What would you tell your teams about Chris? And what were your kind of perceptions of him as a player when you were coaching?
Well, I had great admiration for Chris's game because, you know, he'd come out of a system that had worked really well together as teams. He passed the ball, he moved well without the ball. He was able to shoot a shot that was quick release. He used good up fakes. He had one dribble move to the basket he could release with, you know, a good layup that was able to get it off against the big guys in the game. But I had one player that I really wanted to dedicate to Chris, and that was Scottie Pippen, and I know that as soon as I say that name,
Break out
you'll
knives.
break out knives. We got in the Indiana playoffs, and Mark Jackson was their ball carrier, and we needed to put Scottie Pippen on Mark Jackson. And so I had to take somebody off of Chris and put him on Mark Jackson, which was Scottie Pippen, one of the great defensive players that ever played the game. And I think I ended up putting Michael Jordan on you. And, you know, we used to chase Reggie Miller around, but I left that up to Harper most of the time, another guard that we had. And so, you know, here's one of the other great players that been Defensive Player of the Year in '88, Michael Jordan guarding Chris Mullin. And, you know, we always said, stay on the floor. Don't ever leave the floor against Chris. That was how we worked it.
Nice, nice.
That also worked well.
Chris, one thing I'm so proud of you for is your courage to face yourself and some of the demons and struggles that you've had as a young man and as a player early on. And most recently, speaking about that more, I know you and Liz were really instrumental in the Chris Herron film. And Liz is Chris's wife, who's here tonight. And I know from just our questions on the website and just from friends, people are really curious about your whole process of recovery, what that means, and how it affected you as a basketball player.
Well, the recovery process for me it's ongoing. To me, what I have is a 24-hour reprieve each day. I approach my day slowly and somewhat gently. You know, in the morning I pray and ask God for a sober day. And as I approach the day, I deal with things as they come. I mean, recovery is so important. For me, I'm at the stage of my recovery process where I'm going through the 12-step program. It's about giving back. And I told you this time, it's strange how as I read my daily meditation books, the correlation that I see in sports, especially basketball, and in particular triangle offense, where you somehow pull yourself out of the equation. You take your own feelings, self-pity, and you being the self-centered of the world, and do something for someone else, you get back. And sports has always taught me that. The most success I've had and the most joy I had was being part of a team. Always felt as good about making a good pass as making a basket. And as we were talking about Phil being here, I said, I was amazed at how, be it Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant, how I watched the evolution of their games. I remember when Phil took over in Chicago that first year, we played them early in the season. I think it was '91 maybe. And we played them early in November. And Michael was very good friends with Rod Higgins. So after that game, he came in the locker room a little bit frustrated. And we had a helter-skelter type game. I think we actually won the game, and Michael was still kind of questioning, how does this work? I think he came away with 16 points. But as you saw that thing develop, obviously the results are obvious, but how maybe focusing less on Michael Jordan, he actually got more from it, the ball movement and body movement. And my life today is much like that, where I try and pull my own feelings out of what's going on during the day. I get more back from helping other people. I've learned over the years to slow down. Like Phil said, you know, sometimes the stresses of basketball and the schedule and all those demands, sometimes stepping away is the healthiest thing you can do. So I've received so many blessings, and they're not all from the world. They're not materialistic things, but simple things, good health, you know, health of your children. Being there, being aware, more so than being critical or judgmental. You know, being sensitive to other people's, you know, we don't know what each of us are dealing with during that day. So being more aware to people's, you know, what they're dealing with as opposed to what you always want to get back. So it's been a great, much like Roshi will come up and speak about, it's really just trying to live a life of serenity, being okay in the moment. It's something you have to learn, though. Like Phil said, I still shake myself. I'm a very restless person, too. Yeah. So during the course of the day, I might have to go for a bike ride or a swim just to calm myself down.
Yeah. Yeah, baby. Phil, the Zen Master name that you have, and I was telling your son today that when I was having dinner with you and Roshi, and I didn't really know if you were that serious about Zen, and I was listening to the two of you talk, and I thought, wow, this guy's really into this, and of course Roshi, and I was impressed with that. Could you tell us what Zen is, you know, since you have that nickname, and since you're here at the Sonoma Mountain Zen Center, and what the real influence of Zen is in your life? Sorry about that one.
Well, first of all, I have a small plaque that's on my desk. There are no Zen masters, there's just Zen. So no one can master this. And it's just being in the moment. And even as you go through a situation like here we are in front of you people with great expectations, hopefully saying the right things that will spark a key in your lives that will bring some fruit to your personal life, there's always that next breath that centers you. And that's the thing that is taught in Zen Buddhism, is that it's just the next breath. You get to start over, and the breath is the gate to life. So whenever I had players that were in situations that were untenable, and we were trying to help them through it, I would always teach them, breathe. And I think you say that to your kids, right? When they're having trouble, just breathe. And that's basically life. It's basically our practice of Buddhism is the next breath, or this breath that's going on at the time. So it's trying to be in the moment. And the one thing about basketball that was a wonderful entry for this was that basketball is about being in the moment. And if you can leave the play that just happened behind you, regardless of whether it's a joyous play for your own sake or glory, or it's a terrific play where a referee has called a bad call on you, your opponent's elbowed you in the Adam's apple, or, you know, your shoe's untied, if you can go through that moment and pass by that moment and move on to the next thing that's happening, which is this next process, which might be, I got to get down and play some defense and see the ball and do this kind of activity, you become part of it instead of, like Chris was talking about, being about yourself. Now you're part of the game and you're part of the team, and there you are. Your breath is a natural breath, and you're in it. So that's what attracted me to this practice. As a coach, there was a time for us to practice what I called conspiration. We like to term it inspiration. The word inspire means with breath, conspire means with breath, but conspirity means kind of a negative thing. So I tried to turn that phrase around and make it positive. We went into what we had as a team room and would sit and would breathe together in meditation. So we would try to get into this mode where we could sit for 5 to 10 minutes in quiet and breathe together so that we really got ourselves in harmony. And I think that's one of the keys to the successes that we had. This wasn't something I could do 82 games of the year. It was something I could do once a week. It was something I could do during the playoffs when things screwed up to very high intensity and concentration had to be very, very good for the players. So these are some of the things, the tools I use from my practice that were effective. When I'm in the process of writing a book, and that's one of the things I didn't talk about for the initial question about what I'm doing this year. But in the book that I'm writing, I talk about the fact that we have to bring our spirituality to the workplace. And sometimes it's hard for us to do that. It was a step of faith for myself to be able to turn the light off in the team room and say, all right, we got the television light or some dim light that's on. We're going to sit here for a few minutes and just be calm and breathe together. It was kind of a step of faith that I thought maybe this group of guys could take it and digest it. 3 or 4 years later, I ran into Bobby Knight and Dean Smith, and they said collectively, can we ask you a question? I said, yeah. Is it true that you turn the lights off and have the players hold hands in the dark? I said, it's something like that, but it's not quite that way. But that's kind of what we were doing in a way which we weren't physically holding hands, but we were mentally holding each other in a way in which we were breathing together. And so we established this kind of practice a little bit to help us get through some high tension times and high intensity times. And those things were effective for me in the process of teaching this team spirit.
Phil, I just looked in the audience, and that was a wonderful answer, by the way. Wow. I see a former colleague, Brenda Flies with Hawks, who I know has a Native American background. And once when I was visiting you in Chicago, you had a Native American guy really cool guy, I remember. And could you tell us a little bit about your influence with the Native American culture and how you integrated that into your teams, if you did?
I kind of feel like you jumped over Chris and didn't ask him a question that time. When I went to the Chicago Bulls, there was this intense rivalry with the Detroit Pistons. I was an assistant coach. We ended up in, like I alluded to, a brawl one time. We ended up with players injured. Scottie Pippen had a concussion, couldn't play the last part of the 6th game of a series. And we had this rivalry that went very deep into the idea of I have to be aware that this team is going to, the Detroit Pistons are going to try and outmuscle me. They're going to be physical with me. They're going to knock me down. At some point in the game's going to reach this kind of crescendo, and a fight might break out. And they were big. They were a big team. They were muscular. So there was a television series called The Mystic Warrior about Lakota Indians. And I happen to be a member of Lakota Nation, the Oglala Sioux. And I used this, little pieces of this video or this television series to demonstrate the idea that the enemy brings out the best part of you. As the Native Americans, this Lakota tribe, respected the Crow, which were their major enemy, that if they didn't have them there, they couldn't do these things that brought valor and bravery to their lives. They would go on a horse-stealing raid, and they'd have this great party to steal some horses and have a great time, and things might ensue from there. But it brought out all these things that they had. Even a sacrifice of an animal, they had to thank the animal kingdom for the fact of this buffalo or the elk or whatever deer that they had sacrificed. So this respect for life, I wanted to be in the players, but also the fact that the Pistons could bring out the best part of who we were as a basketball team. Even though they were probably more physical than we were, we had to embrace it rather than shy away from it or retreat from it or be retaliatory towards this physical nature. And that grew from that small little issue. It kind of grew into its own way, and the players kind of embraced it. Now, in this book I'm writing, there are numbers of ways in which a tribe or a cult or a group can evolve. One, they can evolve as they can say, I'm really good, but these guys I'm with aren't so great. And they can evolve in a way in which they start saying, I'm pretty good, and some of these other guys are pretty good too. And then they can evolve in a way in which they can say, hey, we're pretty good. I think you had this feeling about we're pretty good when you had run DMG. Well, I always get that wrong.
TMC.
DMG?
TMC. Yeah.
They're pretty good.
DMC's the rap group.
Yeah.
TMC, yeah.
They were pretty good. That team was really fun to watch. And you get this feeling that we're pretty good. But then there's the next step in which you evolve into we want to play for each other and we want to play above the game itself. And that's kind of the spiritual nature that we were talking about, that we wanted to remember every single game that we went out to play, that it was for the benefit of each other. This is for us. It wasn't about the fact that we had some really good opponents that we were playing against, and we might even have a rivalry. It was about the fact that this was something that we were going to find a way to demonstrate our teamwork or our team effort. And that came out of this kind of tribal, family, cult feeling that evolved into this, wow, this is really fun to be with these guys, and this is really fun tonight to do this event.
Wow, that's great. When you said I overlooked Chris, you're right, I did. I was at Game 7 when you guys beat him in Indiana. Liz and I were there together, and that's how I felt about you that night, too, that they should have passed Chris the ball more, because I was actually rooting for his team.
I'll tell you what,
Yeah.
Phil brought up earlier about if he does go back into the NBA playing a different role, what he just spoke about would be a problem, in my opinion, to find someone to be able to do that. Because what you just said, it sounds good. It's really hard to implement that in today, at any point in time, but in today's game, very, very difficult.
Yep.
I always tip my hat that you're able to do that.
Yeah, really.
Seriously, it was incredible.
Yeah.
Yes.
You'll have to coach the coach quite a little bit, in my opinion.
Right.
Pass it on, because
Right.
not many people have that approach. It might, you know, I don't see it out there.
That's right. I think from being able to win and have confidence in the fact that you can overcome obstacles, that, you know, whether you're in a 12-step program and the day is a lot of pressure and you've overcome this, and you can go back and say, this is really great, you know. It was, you know, there were some things in this day that presented themselves, and we found a way to overcome this. And that is kind of like it is when you're with a team. And I have a trainer named Chip Schaefer who used to get on a bus with me after all the players were on, and we'd be in the front, and he'd say, if we could only put that in a jar and capsulize this way that we did this game tonight, what a night, you know? And that happened many times, and those things are the joys of basketball and the joy of playing together in this group sport that can be